Hi everybody, going to be doing some coding today, going to look at creating a database. I'm going to do this in Tkinter. By doing a database we can then sort of add data to it, edit data, update data, etc. And it therefore gives us those essential skills that we need for a successful NEA. And then obviously the idea of this video is that by having that foundation set of skills, you can then take that further and then really run with your project and really make it a good success. So what we need to make sure we've got is Tkinter installed on your system. So if you're using Visual Studio Code like I am, just in the terminal, just do a pip install. So what I mean by that is pip space install space and then Tkinter. Just run that. It'll download it automatically and you're good to go. Really quite straightforward. So there may be other things we need to install as we go along, but that'll be the main one. So what we've got here then is what I would always really encourage you to do in Visual Studio Code is to open up a folder. When you open up the folder, I'm going to choose my database example. It makes sense to do that. So just click select and you can see it's open here on the side. What I want to do therefore is all of my files and particularly the database will be then saved into that folder. And that's really important you do that because you don't want it saved somewhere random. Then you can start getting connection issues. The code can't find the database and it just causes all sorts of problems. What we'll then do is go file and then new file, and then we're going to do a Python file. So one of the first things we need to do is to actually do some imports. So the way Python works is that it has external files, libraries, modules it calls them, but they're external libraries that you can use. And Tkinter is one of those. So we must always, if we're going to do Tkinter, actually go and get it and install it. And what we're going to do is we want to import all of it. Again, from Tkinter, I'm going to use a message box a little bit. So I'm going to install that as well. So I've got everything that I need. So essentially you do this. Like I said, it won't run properly if you don't. What we can then do is actually start to get into our actual code. And one of the first things we probably want to do then really is to actually set up our sort of opening screen so we know we've got something up and running. Hi, okay, so what I've done here is I've put in the first few lines of code. I've done this on purpose and I'm interested to see what you think about this. But quite often when you're watching coding videos, they'll type as they go along. Whereas what I wanted to try and do was give you more blocks of code that you can then actually read properly and sort of see as it goes along without the screen kind of changing quickly or anything. So it's much easier to pause, I would hope, and therefore you can kind of get down what's going on here so that you can replicate this for yourself. But I just want to explain really what's going on. So what we've started off with here is we've got a root that's going to be TK. The TK is from Tkinter, and what the root does is it sets up like a baseline main window. In other words, it's making sure there's an actual application running. Because the application's then running, you've then got something to sort of have a basis from. So what we've then got is I've just got a title for that. So that would be the bit that would appear at the top of the screen. And then we've got two lines of code here. So login frame and product frame. So in other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two separate entities, two user interfaces, which will be separate of each other, and therefore kind of, but will both be connected to the root. So like the root's the parent, and they're both sitting on top of that. So in other words, when we shut down at the end of the if we're running the system, we shut it down, we shut down the root, and that closes everything down. Whereas the login frame or product frame, because they sit, they're like children of the root, it doesn't have the same impact. We can open and close those, and the system stays live, it stays running. So really quite useful sort of technique to have. Again, we just need to make sure that the writing there, root, matches. You could have renamed this as something else if you wanted to. I'll just call it root because that's a sensible starting point. What we've then got is within the login frame. So I've only set up the login frame so far. Is I've got a line here where you're setting up a label. So in other words, what it's going to display on the screen is the word username has been decided here. I'm just going to that capital letter actually. What's important with Tkinter is that we pack. So what a pack does is it actually adds it to the screen. If you forget to do that, it won't display, and it can be a bit annoying. So I think, well, what I've just put this, why has it not appeared? It's because you've probably not packed it. The pad Y is purely positioning. In other words, what it does is the y-axis, and it's going to go down by 10 pixels. So I have no idea what that's going to look like. It might look weird, but I can always change that number later on. I just want it to not be at the very, very top. Then in line with that, we're going to have an entry login username variable that is updated via an entry. So an entry is like an input box, which is the name that's used in Tkinter. So an input box where the user can type in, and they can type in their username, and it's linked to the login frame, which is important. So it's going to appear on that frame. So if I didn't type in login frame there, it wouldn't appear on the frame, and therefore, so if we follow logic through, we've got an input on the screen on the login frame that's going to then update a variable called entry login username, and we need to pack that, so it's going to actually appear on the screen. So that's for the username. We're going to do exactly the same thing for the password. The only difference here is I've added a show. You can see that where it says show and then a star. And what that does is instead of it showing the letters, it's going to mask it. So it gives a little bit of like a security feature. Nice little effect, really. And again, you'll notice it says pad 20, pad Y20, so it's going to be below the username on the screen. And again, if I'm not really happy with the way that looks, I could always drop it down. If we were to do a pad X, it would move left and right, pad Y up and down. So just a layout element. Then below that, we've got buttons. So in the buttons, actually on the button itself, it's going to say the word login or the word register. Again, they're going to appear on the login frame because I've named them to do so. And then because they're buttons, they need to do something. So I've currently got a command that will open up a function called login user. That doesn't exist yet. We've not created it yet, but that's what it's going to do. So I'll just need to remember that's the name I gave it. And then on the register button, what the register will do it will take you to another frame, a new frame. So because what it's going to do that's going to be within its own function. Okay, so I've done this on purpose. So this one is creating a function that's within the actual code for a login frame, whereas this one is doing a function that actually generates a new frame and therefore requires a lambda to do that. Now, lambda is just a tool that can allow you to do sort of it has more flexibility. It's more what's the word, like it's more friendly, if you like. It's kind of a get out of jail free card type thing to do. It's just more sympathetic to the code that you're putting in, and therefore enables you to run an actual function. And if you notice with this function here, there's no brackets afterwards, whereas because I'm using a lambda, this one does. Okay, so just a point of difference. Hi, okay, so what we've got here is a registration user interface. The idea of this is that with the first one, we were creating a user interface that the person can type in a username and then a password, and then they can press a button to actually activate the login procedure. But then they can also press a button to register, and then this is what we're going to create now, where the idea of this is that they can then put in a new username, new password, and actually sign up effectively for the system. So just like before, we've got two labels. Sorry, we've got a label even, which is on the login frame, and it's got the text of register with it. It's going to be of an Arial font, and again, we've packed it. Again, you'll notice it's been pad Y, so it's just coming down slightly. There will be another second label, and that one will say new username, and again, that's packed. And then next to that, it'll then have an input box, a login frame, which is then going to update a variable called entry username, and again, that's been packed. And then just like that, we've got a new password following through. The thing to point out with this one, though, is it says show star. And what that does is that when you type in, rather than it showing the actual password, it'll mask it, it'll cover it up. So it just gives it that nice security feature. Finally, we've got a button on here, and it will say register user on that button, and then if you click on the button, it'll run the function for register user. Again, it's wiggly under there because that's not actually been created yet. And again, it needs packing so it appears on the screen. What I'm very conscious of at this moment in time is that I've not saved this yet. As you can see up here, it's have a proper name, so in yellow, to sort of highlight that it's not been saved yet. We've not gone too far, I've not done that much code yet really to be overly worried about that, but I would like to save it, and then I can obviously would like to run it as well and just check is there any errors so far in the code that we can then spot early doors. You don't go too far before you sort of hit any issues. So first thing we need to make sure is I've just hashtagged out, so commented out the product frame because we don't need that yet, but using that it's going to be used later on. And then the other issue we've got here is you'll notice there's some error messages here on each of the functions. So we're just going to get rid of those for the time being. So rather than delete them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight them, and I'm going to just duplicate them. And then in the duplicate, I'm going to remove the command from there instead. The reason I was going to do this is purely then I can keep the original ones. If I just hashtag those out, so comment them out. So they're still there, so I can still use the names, etc. But I can at least get it to run in the meantime. Otherwise, it will just show errors and won't run. So it'll just be sort of quite limiting. So I'm just going to get rid of these. Like so, commented out. And then what I've also done is add this line of code here. So this is the login frame.pack. So whereas all of these are packing each item within the each frame, so these were packing the buttons for the login frame, and here it was packing in the registration for the login frame as well. What it does then is it actually puts all of those onto the actual frame. So it's an important line really. The fill both is basically allowing it to spread out for the full X and Y value, and it also will allow it to expand. So it'll just accommodate that or anything that's been added in there quite nicely. Now this line of code is probably the most important line of code, just because the root, if you remember, is the main part of the application. So you can see here, root the TK to remember that. And you've got the title at the top, if you remember. And then the main loop, basically what would happen if we didn't have that, it would read through the code once and then just stop. So the main loop causes it to go back to the start and keep reading through it again and again and again. And that's what gives us our functionality, our ability to move up and down the code and to sort of make it interactive really. Otherwise, like I say, it would just run through once and stops. So what I want to do then, I've got rid of those errors that I know about already. I'm just going to save it. I'm going to call it product management. So just save that now. And then we can do our first run. So we can actually just test that this has actually worked. So I'm going to go start debugging. And you can see it's here. If you got asked to add it, choose a product, an option here, you just choose Python for it to run. What you can see here is that we've actually got the user interface. And if I just move sort of myself out of the way, just move myself over here, and this over here, and you can see that then within our code, if you remember, we had the title product management, which is that bit there at the top. We've then got the label for username, so that's the first one. Then we've got the entry, it's this, where I can click into it. Again, we've got password, and then entry again. And then you can see we've got the two buttons. And because we took the commands off, these don't actually do anything. So we can click them all day long, they won't do anything. Then, again, we've got register with the new username and the new password. And you can see that the font is slightly bigger on the register, hence it sort of shows up, so it kind of makes it a little bit clearer that it's there. And then, again, we've got a button at the bottom, which again, doesn't currently do anything. So what we want to do next is actually be able to get these buttons to do something. But with all of these buttons, they require the database to actually make them work. So what we need to do now is actually create the database. So it's there, and then we can start to use it and actually start to add in data, read from the data, etc. So let's do that next. Okay, so just added in some code, and you can see that what we've got here is a function that creates the database. Within here, we have the connection to the database, which is going to be called product manager.db. So it's a database, and it's just going to carry out that connection using these tables here. I'm going to create both tables at the same time. So what I mean by that is I'm going to have a table for products, which will be ID, name, price, and quantity. I'll use that later on. But I'm also going to have a table for my username and password. It just makes sense to create it at the same time. I would always plan out what's going to be in your database before you ever create one, just because you can get into problems if you start fiddling around with them. Sometimes you can get errors and things like that. So I'm just going to create it all now, and then I know it's there, it's ready to use. We then commit to the database. So in other words, it activates those tables. In this case, you're going to create the tables and put them in. And finally, we should always close a database. You should always close a database after you've opened it, once you finish using it, immediately, really, because otherwise, if you then try to use it again later in the system, you could have problems. So when we're actually creating the table, you can see here we're using some SQL, which is to create the table, and it's basically saying if it doesn't exist, create it, and if it does, don't bother. And again, within here, you can see we've got a primary key, which is the ID, and then we've also got the data types, so text, real for number, integer, the real being because it's going to have the decimal place because it's a price. And again, here we've got an integer for the ID, the primary key, and then we've got text, and then it's unique, so it'll only allow one username of that name. This is a function, so within the code we need to actually call that function. Notice this function is right at the top above the root tk, and then the function call is down at the bottom. So in other words, it's going to open up the login and register frame and then create that database. Reason for that is you want to have all of your functionality below your functions at the top so that you can call them and use them. Otherwise, it can sort of cause you, again, issues down the line. So I'm just going to run this. So I don't know, already open, I didn't realise. So I'm just going to run this. And you can see what's happened is that I've got my frames opened up, so I know it's running properly. And you can also see over here, I've got a product manager here. Within Visual Studio Code, you can actually, if you go to the extensions here, there's something called SQL Viewer. That one there, SQLite Viewer, sorry. If you install that, what it'll do is it means then that when I open a database, I can click on open anyway, it says there SQLite Viewer, I can check what's in there. So you can see that we've got two tables here, product and user, with those correct fields. So I know that that database has been correctly created. And what it also means then is that later on when we're adding to the database, we can see whether that data's gone in or not. So really useful. So I really recommend you do that. We've just created the database. We've just seen that. We've just tested that. Got the tables as well in there, which had all the correct fields, as we saw. And what we want to do is actually make it functional now. So we want to add some data to it. So what we've got here then is a function called register user. And we've got an entry username get. So the get is going to take it from the entry user point on the frame. So in other words, the input box. And if you remember, the entry username is actually in the registration part of the frame. So I'm going to scroll down to show you where I mean. So here, if you remember, we had a label called login on the login frame that would register. And what it would do is it would take the input box and put it into a variable called username. Again, we had one for password, which would take an input box and put it into entry password. So entry username, entry password. So you can see they're the same thing here. So we're getting the data that's been put in the input box and then put it into a username variable and a password variable. What we're then doing is doing a little bit of validation, only a small amount, is we're just testing and checking that there is actually something written in that input box. Yeah, I'm just going to, the user isn't just going to click the register box. We're just going to end up with a load of blank records. We don't want that. If the is blank, it's going to give a warning and say, please fill them in. Otherwise, it's going to commit them to the database. So we're going to connect to our database. So it's called the same thing there, product manager, as we need. And it's going to add it in, and it's going to try and do it. So it's going to, here you can see it's going to execute this SQL here, which is to insert into the users table the username and the password and put in those values. And it's going to pass the parameters of username and password to do so. It's going to then commit it to the database, and it's going to say, yep, it worked. User registered successfully. Otherwise, if it can't do that, it's going to give us a warning. And in the most likely reason why it's going to fail will be because you've already got that username in there already. So username already taken. And just like before, we're going to close that database. Now we've finished, we've opened it just to put the data in, and then we close it again immediately. That sort of stops other errors happening. And then we remove what's currently in the two entry boxes, two input boxes that are on the frame, and therefore it kind of just makes it a bit more useful, doesn't it, when you're using that. So because we've got a function, we need to actually call this function, or else it's not going to do anything. And if you remember, that was called from a button. So before I got rid of that, didn't I? So in other words, I can just bring it back. You can see it's got the same name, register user. I don't need this one now, so I'm going to delete that one. And basically, we can now run this, and then hopefully what should happen is it should now add it to the database. Let's just run this then. So let's wait for it to open up. Then we've got our user interface screen, and then down here we've got new username. So I'm just going to put in Rob for the time being. And I'm just going to put in the password of Rob as well. Then I'm going to click register user. We get the message there saying user registered successfully, which is what should have happened, isn't it? If you remember, that was in the code. I'm just going to move this to the side so I can click off that a sec. On the side, you can see there, that line of code there, user registered successfully. If I just stop this a sec, go into the database, I'm going to open anyway, and then SQLite viewer. And you can see in the users one, you can see there what was added, Rob and Rob. Right then, so we've created a database. We've created a user account. If you remember, it was Rob for the username and then Rob for the password. And what we want to do then is actually create some functionality with this, actually use that data. So because we're creating the ability of users, we obviously want to have a login feature. So here's some code which can carry this out for us. So we've just talked through this. You can see that we've got a function called login user. Then we've got an entry login username and an entry login password. And if you notice, they both .get. So in other words, they're taking data from somewhere. So I just want to scroll down to the login form just to sort of show you what they're referring to. So you've got here the variable that's associated with the input that was on the form for the login. And again, we've got entry login password again associated with the entry point. So they're both on the login frame. So in other words, the login frame opens up, you type in your username and password, you press login, which then should run this particular function, and then we can then sort of move through to the next part of our system, so a main menu or whatever it might be. So we take our data, we put it into the variables of username and password, we then connect and open up our database. We then do some SQL where we select all from users where the username and the password match the username and password we've put in. And then we then go and fetch that data for our user, and then we close our database. Remember, that was good practice. You always close the database as soon as you finish with it. That's to preserve its integrity. All sorts of benefits, stops errors further down the line. So what we've then got is if user is there effectively, and it's a match, then it'll say message box, welcome, and then the name of the username. So because we've only got one user in there currently called Rob, it'll say welcome, Rob. You'll notice I've got a commented out piece of line of code here. you can see that's calling a function, and it's going to call a show product frame function. In other words, the logic would be that if it's there and it logs in, it will then take you to that place. But we're not creating that frame yet, so obviously it doesn't take us anywhere currently. So hence I've commented it out. Otherwise, I just get an error for the time being. And then otherwise, so else, it's going to show an error message saying, warning, your credentials are invalid. Try again, whatever it might be. We could put a feature on there where it counts how many times you've tried to log in, maybe 2-3 times, and then it will stay block you or pause or something. We can do something along those lines. You can also see I've got a function here for showing that product frame. So when it calls it on line 69, you can see then that it's going to actually run this. It's going to forget the login frame that we're currently in other words, close it down, hide it, and then it's going to open up the product frame that we still haven't created yet. So again, that doesn't work. So I've commented it out so it doesn't cause any issues with errors, etc. So the other thing with this is that it's running off the button down here. So what we've got here then is the button to log in. Sorry, wrong bit there. This line here, sorry. The button to log in, where we've got the login, the text, and then we've got the command, which is opening up the function of login user. So just make sure you'll need to add this part of the code to make that happen. And then, as I say, you click on the button, it'll run this function then, and we should then, if it works correctly, we should be able to see it saying hello, the username. So I'm just going to start running this, see what happens. You can see the window's opened up just as we wanted to. Move it here. Remember it was Rob and Rob. Click login and welcome Rob. We know it's worked. So in other words, as this would appear, we then would get the movement to the other page. So obviously we need to create that next. Right, then our next phase is to actually create the products user interface. So what you can see here is that I've used a grid instead of a pad Y. All that's doing is it lays it out as if it's within a table. It's just an alternative way of displaying on a frame. I thought it was worth including both ways really, so you could see the difference. Ultimately, once it's showing, you can't tell any difference. You wouldn't know which way around it had been created. So it achieves the same goal. It's just the way that you control it from a programming point of view. So whereas the pad Y or pad X is literally moving it along, sort of across that axis, with the grid we treat it as if it's in a table, and then within the table, depending on which column or row you choose, will then position that object in relation to another. So you can see that we've got 4 labels with product ID, name, price, and quantity. They're on row 1, 2, and 3, so it starts at 0. And then we're going to have column 0, so our first column. Then we're going to have some entry boxes, and they're going to, for each one of those 4 things, and they're going to be displayed on the row 1, 2, and 3, but in the column 1. In other words, next to it. We're going to have some buttons that will then be below 4, 5, and 6. And what's special about this is here it says column span. So because in the prior to it we've got column 0 and column 1 for the entries and the labels, then the button will go across both columns. So we'll just give it a nicer look really. Finally, we've got then a list box below on row 8, and again that's going to have a column span of 2, so it's going to go across the full width of our full grid. Okay, it's also got that width set, so in many ways that's going to control the width of the grid overall. Well, notice I've got a lot of errors here because I've got them all called product frame. What that's to do with is, if you remember, we had a comment here which we commented out, and then we just released that. But what you'll notice is that still leaves those errors. That's because this one actually says product frame, not product frame. Now I've changed that, you can see they've all gone fine. The other thing I'm still getting errors here for is the commands, because we've not actually created these functions yet. We'll go on to do that next. Otherwise, we now do have a product frame to create, and therefore we can actually carry out this entire function, so it's ready to go. and therefore we can call it as well. So I'll just remove those comments that were there previously in that login user section. So that now will and should fully work, and also we've now got a frame to go to. Before we run it, we just need to make sure these columns here, so move me out of the way, these commands here, sorry, are actually up and running. So let's sort those things out now. Right, so as I was saying, that we've got these 4 buttons that are going to each do some action towards our products. So the first one we'll look at is the insert product. So we'll just bring up here, you can see that we've got a function to insert that data. Just move me out of the way so you can fully see the code. That we can, so it's going to call insert product. We've got the entry to give it a name, which we're going to get from our form. That relates to here. And each of these, you can see we've got 4 of them: entry product ID, entry product name, entry product price. They're here, as you can see, name, price, and quantity. We don't need to enter the ID, that can be managed by the database. We then put it into the database. This actually got the wrong name, so I'm just going to change that. So product manager. So we can open our right database. Then just like before, we're going to do some SQL. So we're going to insert into our products table. Remember, we have 2 products, 2 tables. So in our database, one was the user and the other was the products. So it's going to put in that order: name, price, and quantity, the variables from name, price, and quantity, which have come from the entry points here. So we can see what it's then going to do is clear the writing, the text that's in those entries, just so it's ready to go. And then finally, we'll have a message to show that's been added successfully. If we now move on, then we can look at the view products. You can see what it's going to do. It should then display the products on the screen. So we need to now create the function for that. Okay, so just below the insert products, I've put in a new function. You can see this one's called view products. Again, it's going to open up the database. I've still got the wrong name again. And it's going to select all from products and then just display it. So it's going to put it into the list box, and therefore it's going to go through each row within that database table and then display it on the screen. Right, so we've done the first 2 buttons. We now want to look at this update product button. So the idea of this is that you will be able to change what's in the current database. So say it might be the quantity, or it might be the price, it might be what the actual product is. We want to be able to change that data about it. So I've just done it up here. So below the view products, then we've got the update products. Just move me sort of out of the way. So you can see we've got the function called update product, which matches the button command below. Then we've got each of the entries. So we can basically, where we had before, basically, we're just going to add in our IDs. So these entry product IDs link down here. Just to remind you, they're just here, those there. Sorry, those, they're the entry ones. And what we're then doing is we're taking that, we're opening up our database just like before. Let's move that down slightly. Then we can see that you've got the cursor for it. Then we're going to do an SQL, so we're going to do an update, the table of products, set, and then change those, and it's going to know which one we're on because we've chosen it, the ID, and therefore it's going to pass those variables through. It's going to commit that, and then it's going to again close the database, and then it's going to show, yes, that's been updated successfully as a message, a pop-up, so we know it's happened. And again, it's then going to display the new changed product by running and calling this function here again to actually display that on the screen. Right then, so we're just going to look at the final of our 4 buttons, the delete one. So we need to add a function for this. So I'm just going to put it just below the update there. And you can see here, so I've got it here, that we're looking at the ID. if it's not the ID, then we need to make sure we've chosen one that we're then going to choose to delete. We're going to open the database, just like before. Then we're going to carry out the SQL, so delete from products where the ID matches the ID that's been selected. Then we're going to commit that to the database and then close it, so it should then be deleted. Then we get the message box saying that that's happened, it's worked okay. Then, just like again before, we're going to use the view products function, which is this one up here, if you remember, where it's going to then display the contents of the database on the screen, and then it's going to delete what's in each of those entry points. So that's gone blank, so it's then ready for more usage as we go forwards. Right then, so what we've got now is our 4 buttons to carry out the actions that we want to do with our products. And we've also got a list box, if you remember, which is then displaying the data. What we can actually do with the list box, though, is exploit the fact of it. In other words, because it's displaying each of the items, we can then select that item, which will then help us for either updating or deleting from the database. It gives us just a little bit more usability and more functionality to it. So with that in mind then, if we add a select event, so this is an event, so in other words, it's listening for the click of the mouse that's going to choose that particular item in the list box, and then it will then carry out the following code. So it's going to find the index of that product, then it's going to delete what's currently in the entry boxes that's been shown, and then it will replace it with what it's found from the database effectively. And if it can't do that, then it'll give us an index error. So really quite a simple bit of code, but just really aids that functionality, really makes it useful, really quite a nice feature. Okay, so it's obviously a really good idea at this point to run the code and check it. So this might bring up any typing errors we've got, any other issues, and also we can actually see it running for the first time as well now. So you can see that we've got the login. We've actually got a button that doesn't do anything, so we'll get rid of that in a moment or two. And then we've got the register, just like before. We did already have a user in there, so we could log in, and that takes us then successfully to the product screen as well. We can add in a product. I've already added one in previous to this, but I'll put another one in. So Teddy, putting a price of £2, and there's going to be a quantity of 6 of them. I'm going to add that. It's added successfully, and you can see it's added in with my toy and my Teddy. What I can then do, if you remember, we had a select option, so I can select that. I can update that product. So what will happen now is, because I didn't actually type anything up there, it's going to overwrite, which is done. You can see, which obviously isn't great. That's obviously something that really, when the update button is pressed, we really should make it display up there. So that's something that I can work on and improve. But what I can also do is I can select that and click delete, and it's now gone. Okay. Again, if I just add, say, another product in, I'm just going to go with 3. Put in the bike. It's going to be £100, and there's going to be 3 of them. Just going to add that. And again, if we just go into the database, go to the products bit here, just refresh it, you can see that we've got the bike added as well. So it's in there fine. So everything's working fast. We just need to fix those bits of code, really, don't we? Right. So as a result of that test, there was a few things that weren't quite right, wasn't there? If you remember, when I selected an item, it didn't update the entry points. So I've added in this line of code to do that. Okay. So in other words, what it's doing is it's binding the selection to the on product select function. So actually, what was happening was I'd never actually called this function, so it wasn't actually doing anything, which obviously was then limiting the functionality of the the interface. What I've also done is added a button for logout, because if you may not have noticed, but there was no way of getting back to the login screen. You were permanently logged in and you had to just shut it down. So I've added the button to log out. That's going to do a command that's going to call the logout user, of which, again, I'll just scroll up to wherever I put it, here. So that logout user is going to call the show login frame. So just like we had the show products frame, we're just calling that to make that action happen. So it's doing the opposite. So it's now going to close the product frame and then open the logout frame again. So it's just reversing what we had. And if you remember as well, we had a button that didn't do anything. It was this register button. And I did originally, if you remember, you can see I was originally going to do a show that register frame. Well, we don't need to, it's all in the same one. So I'm just going to delete that and get rid of it. Okay, so I think that was all of the fixes that we needed. I'll just leave that there just in case you wanted to see any of those bits of code just one more time. And again, there, those changes. So let's just run that and just check. I think everything should be okay now. So again, we're here. We've got our login already, and that register button's disappeared now, so if that's gone, we can still log in, just like before. I can view my products, and then now what should happen is when I click on this, it now appears up there. And obviously what that means, it makes it more usable, doesn't it? So that if I can choose which one I want to change, it makes it much easier and quicker to change that and then update that product, as you can see, or ultimately delete that product. So let's delete the bike. It's gone. So I've changed the toy to 4. So let's just do it again. So just see what we're doing. So we've got a price of 4. Let's change that to £4.50. So update product, and we got rid of the bike. So if we go to the products in terms of the database in a moment, we'll be able to see that change. And then finally, remember, I added a logout button. So when I click the logout button, it takes me back to here, so it's no longer logged in. Okay, so everything is working. Let's just check the database, and you can see that in the database, if I refresh it, the bike's disappeared, and we've just got that £4.50, which is what we updated. So everything's working great, isn't it? Really, what we'd want to do now is there's a few still things, sort of improvements I'd quite like to make to this. Would be adding validation, particularly for a more complex password. I'd add a hash probably to the password to make it a bit more private and secure. And then really I'd probably look at trying to make those user interfaces a bit more attractive. Perhaps sort of edit the versatility on them as well. So where we've got the price, it formats it to show as a price, where the quantity might be able to be changed by using like arrow keys or a slider or something like that. So again, it's a little bit more user friendly. And then obviously what we can do with this is then take it much further forwards and add all sorts of other features so that it kind of it creates sort of invoices for people. You can track a series of products. You can sort of track sales prices. You can have like reports set out. We could even add graphs and things, couldn't we, to show how products are being sold over a period of time. There's all sorts of things we could then do with this. So I hope that you've sort of found that useful, and that you can sort of feel like you could get a sort of a system at least started. And then obviously really it's up to you then to build on that and to sort of take this as far as you can. So good luck with it, and I hope, like I said, you found this useful. Okay, thanks. Bye for now. Okay, well, I just wanted to say thank you for watching. I really hope you found it useful and really hope you've learned something. Please do like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you again. Thanks a lot. Bye.